and you have to learn, I think, in life that like humans are social beings, and like it's important to be a social engineer as well.
In this episode, I have a conversation with Dr. Diego Huyke. Diego got his bachelor's in mechanical engineering at MIT, his PhD in mechanical engineering at Stanford, and is currently a consultant at Bain and Company. We talk about what it's like growing up in Puerto Rico and how that influenced his path to MIT and his time there. We then get into some discussion surrounding PhDs, as well as microfluidics, the topic of his PhD. Finally, we talk about how and why a mechanical engineer became a consultant. Let's actually just start. What was it like growing up in Puerto Rico? Can you start us off from there?
Yeah, growing up in Puerto Rico. So, for people that don't know about Puerto Rico, it's a territory of the United States. Technically, it's a commonwealth. So, picture it like you're living in a state that speaks Spanish and is much poorer than the average state in the United States. So, it's actually poorer than even the poorest state in the United States. But it still feels like living in the United States. Like you're born with a U.S. citizenship. And you're able to travel to the U.S. Just as easily as anyone from Florida or Kansas. But like I'm very proud to be Puerto Rican, and it's a huge part of my identity. And it's something that I tell people almost immediately when I meet them. But I liked growing up in Puerto Rico. I like it feels almost like a gift, you know. And maybe you feel this way also being from Trinidad, like. It's like a part of your identity, no? And it's like a cool thing to share, and you can always feel like a sentimental value. And I think Americans also feel this, you know, but it's kind of cool when it's also like a small place. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you feel a bit unique also.
Especially in Puerto Rico, like it's so easy to just make it to come to the U.S. I mean, the thing is in the U.S., and I'm sure a lot of like people know this, like the educational opportunities, the job opportunities is just something incredible, right? So if we really want to pursue the careers that we're pursuing, we have to think very seriously about leaving Puerto Rico or leaving Trinidad, at least for some amount of time.
So let's dig into that part a bit deeper now. So
Mhm.
maybe let's like talk about what you were like in high school. Were you like smart student, like average student, a below average student? When did you decide that you wanted to take it seriously? And what was that path like getting to MIT, like applications, etc.? Yeah.
Mhm. Um, Depends on the category, the average or below average. Probably below average in most
Okay.
categories. No. Okay, so um, I think yeah, I've always been a STEM person. Have you always known that you were interested in STEM,
I always
Brad?
knew I always was good at physics, but everything else I sucked at. So sort of had no
Yeah.
choice. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
You kind of you played the hand you were
Yes.
dealt.
Yeah.
I think part of that is like that for me. I've always known I wanted to be STEM. Like I was always super interested in science, in and mathematics. Like I was always super interested in that. My grandfather was an engineer. So I don't know if this is a little weird. You know, my grandfather was an engineer, and I think like as a kid, I maybe saw him as like the figurehead of the family or
Mm.
something. And I saw that he was an engineer, and maybe that's why I leaned towards
Uh-huh.
STEM. That's like me. I've fallen into this theory in the past like two
Uh-huh.
years. You know, I'm like trying to deconstruct why it is that I'm in
Did
STEM.
they push
But
you
I
with
mean,
like
whatever. I've always
engineering toys like the Legos and these type of things?
not. I mean, they didn't push it. It was like so
Yeah.
self-driven. You know, like my dad is actually a professor of philosophy,
Oh,
and
I had
my
no
mom
idea. I knew he
studied
was a professor, but I couldn't remember what in. Yeah. Yeah.
philosophy. Yeah, you studied philosophy
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But the math philosophy. He doesn't do that kind of philosophy.
Yeah.
But anyways, the point is like my family was like very humanities oriented. Besides my grandfather, I mean, for whatever reason, I was very motivated by this. I think my mom was very supportive. And so actually, I think maybe I've told you this story when I was in fifth grade. So I would have been 10 years old. My mom took my family to Boston for a family vacation, just like unrelated to engineering or whatever. But she took me to the MIT museum, and I guess maybe she was trying to make a move. I don't know, maybe wanting me to be an engineer or something. But and like at that time, I said, I want to study robotics, and I want to come to MIT and research robotics when I was 10 years
Wow,
old.
because of the museum.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
I
actually,
saw the museum.
mhm,
It's pretty cool.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's got some cool stuff, and it made an impression on me, um, like I was blown away. Uh, and I think like I probably didn't really understand what I was saying, like deeply what it meant to go to MIT. But my mom and my grandmother, they would hear this and they would be like, "Yeah, Diego, do it," because like what parent is not gonna want that for their kid, right? Um, so that was like from there, I was like very set, and I had like I didn't know if I wanted to study physics. Like I thought for a while I wanted to study physics actually. Um, I didn't know if I wanted to study bioengineering, if I wanted to study civil, mechanical. I like changed a little bit. I was really into robotics in high school, and I did like math competitions at the Puerto Rico level. Um, and I think so. The most pivotal moment. So if anyone's watching this and they're in 10th grade or 11th grade, I think, and you're considering MIT very seriously, the one of the number one things you could do is to consider applying for MITES. And I think I've told you about this program.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard about it. Can you like say what does might has a meaning, right?
Yeah, so MITE stands for MIT. Uh, no, sorry, Minority Introduction to Engineering and Science.
Okay.
MITES. Um,
So who can apply for
Minority
this?
Introduction to Engineering and Science. Huh?
Who can apply for this?
So it's any U.S. citizen, and they give preference for minorities. It's minority introduction. They'll have non-minorities from kind of like disadvantaged backgrounds, but the point is, it's completely free. You don't have to pay for anything in this program except for your ride to Boston. But once you get there, you spend 6 weeks living. It's a summer program. You spend 6 weeks living in an MIT dorm. It's called Simmons, the dorm, and you basically Monday to Friday you take classes. Like imagine like just like high school level classes, but like I mean like very advanced. I mean you take like calculus, you take physics, you take chemistry, um, and in the weekends you do like Boston stuff. Like you go to Martha's Vineyard, you go to Faneuil Hall or whatever. But it's like very shocking in a positive way. So the number one thing, like you learn a lot of math and science. Yeah, that's cool. But the number one thing is like you leave that program and you really feel like I'm gonna get into absolutely any university that I apply to, and it's not true. You're not going. I mean, you still have to apply, and that's hard, whatever. But the confidence that it gives you is incredible, and I think that's super important for applying. And the other thing that you learn a lot is about the process of application. I think and more in high school I was like this. Like I always thought content was everything and presentation was nothing. Like how you talk doesn't matter, how you write it doesn't matter as much. You just got to be smart. That's what I thought.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
just got to know how to do math, right?
Yeah.
But that's not true. And
That's
so
not
with this
true
program, you
for
learn
getting into MIT or just in life.
it's
I
not true in life, but in in mites, it's like you have to think. I learned that you have to think very seriously about your application. Like, and for example, like when you're in high school, when you're a senior, first semester of senior year, when you're writing those college applications, you should treat those college applications as more important than any homework or any test because really it is more important. And you have to spend hours writing drafts of your essays. You have to send them to people, get their comments, incorporate those comments. Like you have to like research like example essays by people who've gotten into MIT. If you have any friends who've gotten into any university, you want to see like that kind of stuff that they wrote. And nowadays, it's so easy to learn, right? Like or to find those resources on the
So
internet.
how did you do? You did like reach out to teachers, friends who got into MIT or like other universities and
I think the number one thing is to okay, I'll say two things. Number one is to look at examples, and that's straightforward because You just Google this, and like on Reddit and other websites, like you'll find excellent examples of some excellent personal essays. Um, and even like just a quick Google search. I mean, really, it's not that hard to find. And the second is to get feedback. So it's true, you might not have people. So for some people, that's true. They don't have anyone who's gotten into these kinds of universities, and you just look for what you can. And like for example, even your high school English teacher, your high school science teacher, all of those people, they could, because honestly, you could even have grammatical mistakes. And if all you're doing is read reading and typing on your by yourself, it's much harder to catch those things, right? So even dumb mistakes can be caught, right? And that's still valuable. um, and share with multiple people, and incorporate the feedback, really, because of course, like, a lot of times you think something is obvious and it's really not, right? um, so that's super important, I think, and to spend time. So start early, like start with, like, with a month or two in advance or something like that. I think it's very important. I cannot stress it enough, and that's true for undergrad admissions, right? It's true for when you apply to MITES, for example. If you're considering that, it's true for undergrad admissions. It's true for grad school admissions. It's true for
Applying for
getting
jobs.
a job.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So in high school, I was like the opposite. I mean, I was like I would wear different colored socks. So you can imagine how many friends I had. I was like, I want to be quirky, I don't care about presentation. I think it's important. Yeah, it's a skill.
So I guess moving into that, it's like what were your sort of expectations of what MIT would be like, and which ones were like true and which ones were false, Like how was that experience for you?
I think I underestimated the culture shock coming to the U.S. Okay, so I grew up. I was very. I think I'm very privileged to have gone to the high school that I did in Puerto Rico. The educational system is very bad. Public schools. I mean, it's very sad, but students in Puerto Rican public schools, a lot of them don't make it to MIT. Right. So at MIT, we had like 15 Puerto Ricans a year, and they're all from private schools. I was very fortunate to be in one of these private schools, and the way I describe, like, I don't remember learning English, right? So I've always known English my entire life. It's like if I ask you when's the first time you had a sandwich, you don't
Yeah.
remember. Right? It's like it's always a part
Yeah.
of you. But anyways, the point is, I've always spoken English. I've always watched American TV, right? Like I watched Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, all of that stuff. So I thought, I'm Puerto Rican. I watch all this American TV. It's just like going to Puerto Rico, but they speak English, and I speak English. Um, I had a little, so mites was also great because it kind of lets you dip your toes a little bit in college. Like, you spend 6 weeks away, which is not the 4 year commitment, right, of going to college, and then you get a flavor for it. But I think, like, one of the first things I noticed is, like, after I spent like days talking English nonstop, I was like, oh wow, it's actually kind of exhausting. I'm always talking in English, right? And I was surprised by that. I thought that wouldn't occur to me, but it happened to me a little bit, and then pretty afterward, I got over it pretty soon, actually. So that's a good thing. Culturally, it's hard to describe differences between Puerto Ricans and Americans. I think Puerto Ricans, I mean, we're Latinos, so like, you tell me to be at some place at 1 p.m., and I'll be there at 1:30 or something like that, and it's not like that in the United States. Okay, so another thing is, like, I think Latinos are maybe more relaxed, maybe kind of like Californians in that way. Like, for example, I think one of the things I found very shocking, like when I first came to the United States, is like how fast McDonald's were. Like, you would go to McDonald's, and the cashier is like, "What do you want?" "Oh, number five, a large Coke and a fries." "Okay, that'll be $5, whatever." And then you touch the card, right? And like, or you swipe your own card, right? Or sorry, yeah, you swipe your own card, right? Exactly. And then it's like, okay, next person. They give you a receipt, and you wait in line, and then like 10 seconds later, someone's shouting number 27, or whatever, right? And in Puerto Rico, it's like, oh, okay, like, how are you doing? Okay, what do you want? Okay, do you want the large? Okay, yeah, fine. And then you give the credit card, and they swipe it, and like, the whole thing just takes longer. So at first, when I went to a McDonald's in the U.S., it was like a little bit shocking to me, but I got used to it. But it's just like, I think that's like a representation maybe of like the differences in this culture, like how we're slow
Yeah.
paced, right?
It's like your the Big Mac index, but for like culture and yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But besides that, I mean, I really like living in the States. I mean, I have a lot of friends here. I still go to Puerto Rico every year. I go about once a year. Um, so I have not lost all of that Puerto Rican culture, you know.
So like
Mhm.
what about some of the expectations you had about MIT in terms of like what the people might be like, what life would be like, and did they live up? What were like some that were false? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Okay. I think people were definitely more cool than I expected them to be.
this
I
is
thought it
coming
would be
from a
a lot
nerd,
more
right?
like yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I okay. Personally, I believe that everyone at MIT is a nerd. Some people are more nerds than others. Um, I'm a nerd also, and I think there's nothing wrong with it. It's okay. It's okay. Um, I expected people to be more nerdy than they were, and it's definitely not true. I mean, I think like what are some of the myths that I thought about MIT students that they would be more nerdy, and they were less nerdy than I thought. Another thing that surprised me was the fraternity culture,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And um, fraternities are just a very big deal at MIT, and they have these statistics like, and you probably know some of these like, uh, uh, people in fraternities and Greek life at MIT, they have higher grades. They make more money in their lifetime. They donate more money to the university in their lifetime, and I think a lot of it is related to what we were talking about presentation. I think be okay. I don't want to. It's a very complicated topic. I think part of it is due to presentation. You learn about presentation skills, right? Like being in a fraternity, because it's like organized
Yeah.
friendship is what I would call it, and you have to learn. I think in life that like humans are social beings, and like it's important to be a social engineer as well. And so you learn that in fraternities.
Yeah.
Um, I think people also say like the reason that fraternities are doing better, like all of those statistics, it's only because people who join fraternities are typically richer and they already had more resources coming into MIT,
I see.
which may be true. I think that's a very complicated subject. In fact, I'm kind of afraid, even, or not afraid, but I think fraternities in the future they might be looked down upon, and I think it's already starting because people think it's like sexist or it encourages a certain type of behavior. And I'm not opposed, and I think it's actually a good thing if fraternities include women.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the engineered friendship is still really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so that was one thing that surprised me about MIT. It's like the Greek life. It's like pretty big actually, and it's a thing I talk to people still, and I tell them I was in a fraternity, and they're like surprised about it because like I tell them how big. Like you might have this experience also. They're like, oh, there are fraternities at MIT,
Yeah.
as people will say, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. They're surprised, yeah.
and I bet it was maybe even bigger back then. Like Richard Feynman, he was in a fraternity.
Yeah, I can't remember
Um,
which one, but I remember hearing that, yeah.
yeah, um, yeah. So I mean that was a very positive experience. I think some things that were exactly like I expected at MIT is the availability of classes. Like, I mean, you can just take a class in whatever you want, and I think like MIT lived up to that in it's like what I understood MIT to be. The other thing is research opportunities. I think for undergraduate researchers, I don't know a place that makes it easier than MIT to perform research as an undergrad. It's just so available, right? I don't know if like you have any thoughts about this
Yeah, wait,
also.
so I want to get to this, but let's take one
Hmm.
step back, and can you tell us like some of these classes that you took? You said you can take anything, and like sort of it's funny because at least in Trinidad, MIT, everyone was like, "Oh, this is the best
Hmm.
engineering school in the world."
Hmm.
But I was going there to study physics, not engineering. And I
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
really, I feel, well, basically for including myself and like a lot of people, what do you think makes MIT the best engineering school in the world? But just keep it for now with regard to classes, and then we'll switch to research. Yeah, as your undergrad
Okay.
experience in
Yeah.
classes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'll say like even before I say this that I think I don't know if MIT is the best school in the world, but I think one of its strongest components, it definitely is got to be up there of one of the best schools in the world. I think one of the strongest components is the research. I think classes are very good, but I think the research is what makes it stand out. But talking on the topic of classes, I mean, they do offer really strong classes. It's very impressive, the curriculum in mechanical engineering, the classes that we take. So, for example, I think this one class is like, so I want to say the availability of classes, but also the resources that the classes have.
Mm.
And for example, I took a class in mass manufacturing, and it's a project based class, and the project is to make 50 yo yos, right? So that's what you do in the class. You take a semester long class and you make 50 yo yos. But the point is that you learn about like injection molding and manufacturing. And it's like very amazing that you can just sign up for a class, right? There's just one semester and you're like mass manufacturing. You know what I mean? This is not an opportunity. These are not resources that are given to a lot of people in a lot of schools in the entire world. I mean, it just speaks to the availability of resources at MIT,
Yeah, and you don't have to
right?
pay for anything extra. It's
You
just
don't have to pay for anything
okay.
extra. Some classes you do have to do this. You have like a lab fee. It might be like 50 bucks, 100
Okay,
bucks.
can you get
But
those
think
waived
about
if you
the cost
ask?
of the resources. It might be very possible, actually. That's a good question.
Okay, probably. Yeah,
Probably.
yeah,
Um, there's like, but I mean, that's in engineering. I mean, like, it's incredible the resources that you have available to you, right? But then, you can do more than study engineering, right? MIT, they call themselves engineers, but there's, of course, like science, right? Like, you study physics, right? And you can do other sciences. They have like biology, all the major sciences, but also you can not study any of those things. You can study something outside of STEM, right? So, like, you took philosophy, that was basically math classes, but there's also
yeah,
other
yeah.
philosophy
They were
classes.
non-math philosophy
You
classes.
you can study history, you can study arts. There's actually like a very solid arts department at MIT. You can study architecture. I actually took a class, I forget the class number, but it was about art in the public sphere. I think that was the name of the class. And we basically just talked about art in public spaces, so like sculptures, performance arts in public spaces, and the class, like, they focus on different countries every semester, and I didn't know this when I signed up for the class, but apparently part of that class is that every is because it's always in the spring. For spring break, you fly to the country that you're studying, and you spend a week there, and this is completely free. There's actually no fee.
Oh my god.
It's completely
Yeah.
free. There's no fee associated to that part of the class. So I got to go to Brazil. It was incredible.
Damn.
So like they even pay for your Brazilian visa process. So you have to go and get the visa. They pay for that. They pay for the transportation. They pay for the hotel. I think they paid for the food. And it's just like incredible. I mean, this is like an unbelievable opportunity, right? That you're able to do this. Um, so MIT is just like much more than engineering and science, really. I think that surprises a lot of people.
Yeah. It surprised me. Yeah. As all those things you're talking about remind me about music and
Mhm.
acting and these things too. Yeah. It was quite
Yeah,
yeah.
like, uh huh.
It was just like mind blowing how much goes on. Yeah.
It really is. I think like maybe that's one of my things about MIT. I wish I would have taken more classes, actually,
Yeah. Same.
and uh, and in more diverse things. This is like something I've been thinking about recently. Is like odds are that if okay, so let's say you study engineering, whatever, you study science, whatever. Okay, so let's stick to engineering because it's a little bit more what I know. But let's say you study engineering, mechanical engineering, bioengineering, whatever, and you get a job in industry, presumably also a role that requires engineering. Odds are that you're going to be working on something that you did not dive deeply into in undergrad. Do you see what I mean? Like, for example, like if you graduate and you get a job at Boeing doing structural analysis of wings or something like that, like odds are that you didn't take like six semesters worth of classes of like structural mechanics and simulations. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Um,
Like
it's
they're just
very
gonna
hard.
learn it on the
Mhm.
job anyways. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
That's my point. Is that a lot of the stuff that you're gonna do, you're gonna learn on the job
yeah.
anyways. So I almost wish that I would have taken less classes. I took a lot of classes in design and manufacturing. I kind of wish I would have done less of that and more like just one class in computer science
Hmm.
or and another just like one class in bioengineering and just one class in something else, just
Get
like
a broader.
because a lot of the time,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And even one
yeah,
semester, it really sets you up because now you understand like what is the language
yeah,
of that field to some
yeah.
degree. And so if you want to learn more about it, you can learn more about it. But it's just like seeing the world.
Right.
And at MIT, where there are so many classes to choose from, you don't have to pay more money to take more classes, right? And most classes, they don't have like debilitating capacity limits, so like there are very few classes that are oversubscribed, right? So you can pretty much do whatever you want. And also at MIT, you actually don't need that many classes for your major, right? So you actually a lot of people don't declare until their second. Most people don't declare until their second year. A lot of people switch majors. I mean, we have friends, right? They switched major like their third year, and they would still graduate on time, right? So I think that's one regret. I wish I would have taken more broad classes. I don't know if you agree. Also,
No, I have that struggle in that like I
hmm
knew that I wanted to do grad school in physics, and
hmm
so then I'm trying to set myself up to do well in grad school because I think doing well in like especially in like theoretical physics, being exposed to these things sooner helps, because then in grad
hmm
school you get exposed to it again and then you get better, and like your job really depends
yeah,
on your ability to do the class material. So
right, yeah, exactly.
yes,
I think it's gotta vary for sure. It's gotta vary a lot.
yeah.
Between fields. Between engineering and science is two very different things.
Mm. But I guess if I knew I wanted to get a job right after, then I would definitely have done broader things. Yeah. But sort of I knew that I
hmm
wanted to go into the PhD, so I was like more narrow in my pursuits. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. It's a different kind of human being pursuing the PhD.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We'll get into that with you soon, but let's go back to the research. So, I think not everyone listening to this fully understands what it is to do research, right?
hmm
Did you know what it
Yeah.
meant to do research when you were in high school?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, so
Yeah, for
can
sure.
you
I mean, I think.
describe,
hmm
like, tell someone what is research and how did you get engaged with it in undergrad? And yeah,
Yeah. I can only speak from the perspective of an
yeah,
engineer.
yeah, exactly.
But
And as a
and I will
PhD
also say,
engineer.
and at the
Yeah.
PhD, and I'll say a lot of people, even at the PhD level, even fourth year, fifth year PhDs, they still don't understand what research is.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't fully understand what research is. It's just a very complicated thing. Um, but I think the simplest way to think about it is to just think about it as a job, and your job is to do something that no one else has ever done before, and you get bonus points if it's very interesting also, right? So that's kind of interesting. I mean, it doesn't have to be super interesting what you're doing in research, and it could still be research. But you want to try to do something that's interesting, either because it helps people or because it's very good explanation of something that's occurring. Um, but whatever, yeah. So think about it as a job where your job is to do something that no one else has done before, and this sounds very scary. I think, right? Like when you phrase it that way, it's like
Yeah.
uh, so what you try to do is you say, okay, I'm gonna focus in on something that's like very specific, So, for example, in undergraduate, I was doing this research. If you've ever heard about the MIT robotic cheetah.
Yeah. Oh, I think I've seen the Boston Dynamics one. Is it the same?
Okay. I think it's not, but it's a similar concept. It's like biomimetic robotics is what they call it, like when they're mimicking biology, like real animals. This is like joke about like the last thing a lot of us are going to see in our lifetimes is one of those Boston Dynamics robots with a machine gun mounted to its
Oh
back.
my God. Okay.
That's
That's terrifying.
that's the way the world ends. Yeah. No, but okay. So Boston Dynamics also okay, and so this okay. So I think research is your job, doing something that no one else has done before. It gets interesting also with engineering because engineering is not science.
Yeah,
Okay, and
I was gonna ask, yeah.
uh-huh.
What's it like? How
It's
do
a
you see
gray
yourself
area.
different from a scientist, because with
Uh-huh.
I think with my field I would say it's sort of like as you were saying, like doing something someone hasn't done before. Once you're
Hmm.
constrained to the scientific method though.
Okay, so that's a different question about like engineering versus science is super gray area. I'm still trying to answer the question for myself,
Okay.
but I'll circle back to it. Okay, so talking about research, in engineering research, typically the way people think about it is just like I want to build something that no one else has built before. So for the robotic cheetah, it's like, well, no one else has ever built a robotic cheetah. So if we built a robotic cheetah, we're doing something that no one else has done before, and um, it's interesting because now you have this robot that has very good ability to move around in maybe uneven terrains or stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's another one of my regrets. I think in at MIT, I just really did not take research seriously. I think I was putting in maybe about 4 hours a week, 3 hours a week,
Yeah.
and really, I mean, I think you really need to be in a PhD for at least 2 or 3 years. I mean, I don't know. Some people definitely can understand it
Yeah.
faster than I do, but I think you have to be doing research for a while, for a long time before you really understand what it's like to do research. Um,
I agree, yeah. At least that's
right? I
my
mean,
experience also. Yeah.
uh huh.
Yeah, yeah. Not to say that there weren't those anomalies in MIT those
Hmm.
undergrads who would like contribute to like scientific papers in like big ways,
For
but
sure.
the
Yeah,
average
for sure.
person we got to wait till a couple of years in the PhD. Yeah.
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 Okay, so then circle. Okay, so then research. It's like you're doing this thing that no one else has done before,
Yeah.
whatever. And then what's interesting about research is that the way you prove this, that you did something no one else has done before, is you write what are called papers, right? Like scientific
Yeah.
papers. And it's a big deal. A paper is a big deal. It's almost like getting a patent, right? It's like, hey, look, I did this and look at the proof. And papers usually have multiple authors. So these are the people that worked on the paper. And the first author is a special term used on one of the authors that did the most significant amount of work. And getting a first author publication, for people that don't know, this is basically the currency of academia, right? This is like, I think it's kind of it's not sad. I think it's like maybe misguided a little bit. I think academia could be better, but I also understand why we talk about papers the way that we do. It's just like that's the goal. It's like that's how people think about their research. Like the way they ask themselves, like, "Am I a good researcher?" The answer to the question is or you ask these questions. You ask, "How many papers have you published? What journals are those papers getting published in?" And like journals are like magazines that publish collections of papers. And then also how many people are looking at my paper and citing, which is like when someone references your paper in another paper.
Yeah.
And so people that don't know, like, uh, to get a PhD, it typically means that you have to write about 1 to 3 papers, 1 to 3 first author papers, and it depends on the field. Some people publish more, some less.
Yeah.
You can get a PhD without a paper,
Yeah,
right?
I heard in math that's the
Um,
case pretty often. Yeah.
Oh yeah, interesting. And some fields, it's like they publish a lot of like they go to conferences, and they'll have like 10 conference papers, which are like shorter papers, and that's also considered like normal in their field. Uh, but that's really what it boils down to. Uh, like research is like publishing papers. That is kind of what it boils down to. Doing things that no one has ever done before, writing about it in like 10 pages, and sharing that. That's like you did research. Um, going back to this question about engineering versus science, you brought up a really interesting point about the scientific method. So I think engineering and science are two different things, and engineering is actually older than science. Engineering came before science, and I think like the example I like to use is like the pyramids.
Uh-huh.
Building the pyramids at Egypt. In
Yeah.
Egypt, uh, that's a huge engineering
Yeah.
challenge, right? And we were able to do it. So we definitely had engineers back then.
Yeah.
Um, you ever heard this joke like, how do you tell uh, like a nerdy engineer apart from like a more social and cool engineer?
I've heard this from mathematicians, and it's like the other one, like one of them looks at your shoes, not their shoes. So I don't know if that's the is that the same? Okay.
We got the same
Yeah.
joke. We got the same joke, exactly. So I bet those engineers in Egypt were probably also staring at their own shoes. I don't know, maybe. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But okay, so that's engineering for sure. And then science is a different thing. I think of science as a knowledge, and knowledge is abstract. Knowledge is not in language. Knowledge is not in numbers. It's not in equations either. It's an abstract thing that exists in somewhere. I don't know. We can only verbalize our knowledge, right? Whatever. But science is knowledge that we have collected using the scientific method, and that's all that science is. And that's a consequence of the Enlightenment. So this is like 1700s. We're talking about like 1600s or whatever. This is it's science is a fairly new thing. It's much newer than engineering.
I see.
So I don't know if you think about science and engineering differently.
Yeah, I guess when I think about research and I think about it for scientists, I sometimes like to draw like a Venn diagram. Or I just like a chart, and I'll say like this is all of human knowledge. And the job of a researcher in science is to sort of sit on that boundary of human knowledge and not like the unknown, and try to increase that sort of space of human knowledge, to add on to it.
Yeah.
That's how I view research in science,
And I think that connects really well actually with the idea of like research as doing something that no one else has done before.
Yeah.
It's like discovering something that no one has discovered before, right?
Yeah.
I think I use the word do because I come from this like engineering background.
Yeah.
We do things, we don't learn things in engineering. That's not true. We also learn things.
Yeah. So I also I guess this has a follow-up question in that if you're like building and doing things that someone hasn't done before, how is this different from when like a company, for example, like you said Boeing, like what if like Boeing or like SpaceX, how is this different from when they do things that people haven't done before? What's the distinction between research? Is there a distinction between those two doing new things that people haven't done before?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is that I think you can consider those structural engineers at Boeing to be doing research.
Okay.
A lot of it has to do with the degree of advancement, I think.
Okay.
So first of all, there are people doing research at many tech companies, right?
Yeah.
So research is a part of the way that these these companies can stay alive even, right? It's a big part of that. I think there's a distinction between industrial research and academic research, because industrial research tends to be more short-sighted. It's more looking at the end result, and it's more profit-driven, right?
Yeah.
So like the reason that they're analyzing, right, those wings is maybe for to think about maybe can we switch to a cheaper material and still be just as safe. So it's still motivated by profit in the end.
Yeah.
Whereas more like academic research, it it usually tends. Oh, and then the other thing is the engineer at Boeing is more thinking about like this is change that we're going to implement in the next 5 years. And some companies will do research like further into the future, but it's usually shorter pace.
Yeah.
And then academics are more like, you could honestly be working on something that's not going to be in use for 20 years.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's just the scope of things, and you try to really push the envelope with academic research, and usually because the consequences are not as severe if you fail, as versus like a company, right?
Yeah.
I mean, capitalism is brutal, and the company won't survive, right?
So, can you give us an insight into like what your research is at Stanford? Because it's microfluidics, right?
Microfluidics, yeah,
So,
exactly.
like, what is it? What is microfluidics for at the high schooler level? How do you explain it to a high schooler?
Yeah.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah. Like, okay, so microfluidics it's like a very hard thing to explain to people at parties. And like, I don't know of any kid in high school or elementary school is like growing up and saying like, I want to study microfluidics, And my friend made a joke the other day like, I don't know any PhD student that is going around saying they want to study microfluidics. But that's not true. I mean, like, so I'll step back a little bit. So I think in the most like easy words to describe, it's fluid mechanics. It's like what you said in the intro. It's fluid mechanics at the microscopic scale. So fluids, like liquids and gases, are just states of matter that behave in a certain way. And in microfluidics, we describe the behavior of those fluids at, again, microscopic scale. So like, if you think about a strand of hair, right? A strand of hair has a diameter. If you had a strand of hair in your hand, and you looked at the diameter of the hair, that's about 150 microns.
Oh, wait, what's a micron?
And so that's right. So you know what a meter is, right? So take 1/1000th of a meter, and that's what we call a millimeter. In the United States, I think people haven't heard of millimeters, but it's like 2.54 centimeters is in inches, or whatever. But okay, you have a meter. Take 1,000th of a meter, and that's a millimeter. And a lot of people have an idea of what a millimeter is. And then take 1,000th of that, and you get a unit of measurement, which is called a micron.
Okay.
And about 150 of those microns make up the diameter of a hair.
Okay.
The other way to think about it is like a dot or a period at the end of a sentence in like standard 12-point font size, whatever.
Yeah.
Is about 50 to 100 microns.
Okay.
So it's pretty small, but you can still see it with your eye, of course, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I do. I study the behavior of fluids at the scale of a hair.
Okay.
So another way to think about it, I'll do one last analogy, is you have pipes in your house, right? Like maybe connect your faucet like to the drain or whatever.
Yeah.
So imagine you took that pipe and it's maybe like the size of like your hand or something like that in diameter.
Yeah.
This light is too bright.
Yeah.
And start shrinking that and shrink it and shrink it and shrink it.
Yeah.
Until it's the diameter of your hair, and then try pushing water through that. And that's what I study.
Okay.
So hopefully that paints a picture. It's a pretty it used to be pretty niche, and I can even talk about the history about this stuff. But in more practical terms, okay, try to think about any situation where handling a small amount of liquid, like water, is interesting. Is interesting.
Okay.
Can you think of a situation where that's interesting?
I think like capillary action.
Shower, right?
Oh,
Huh?
I was thinking of
Capillary
capillary action in plants. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's a good example. And I think the example I like to use is more like relevant at the times is like coronavirus, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. So
talk a bit more about that. Yeah.
Okay. So think about this: when you take a nasal pharyngeal swab.
Yeah.
So that's like the swab they put into your nose.
Yeah.
Okay. Inside of your nose, if you're sick with COVID, you have coronaviruses inside of your nose. And those coronaviruses, they contain RNA. So it's like the nucleic acid, the genetic information for the virus.
Mm-hmm.
They have RNA. So the idea is when they put that swab in your nose, they're rubbing it around in there, and they're picking up RNA that belongs to the coronavirus if you're sick with COVID,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So now you have a swab in your hand. It's like a Q-tip, and it's got coronavirus RNA on it. And how the hell are you supposed to figure out if there's RNA on it or not? Well, what people typically do is they take a small volume of water. So the amount of water that we're talking about is about a milliliter. So think about a 1 liter bottle of water and try to think of 1/1000th of that.
Yeah.
In fact, it's like a tube, maybe like this diameter and maybe like this tall. Maybe that's about a milliliter of water.
Like in the cap of a water bottle or something. Like if you were to take the cap
Yeah,
off.
that's a great example.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great example. So
Okay.
that's about a milliliter.
Okay.
Okay. So you take that amount of water and you take the nasopharyngeal swab
Yeah.
and you put it in there.
Okay.
And what happens is the RNA dissolves. It dissolves into the water, right?
Okay.
And what you end up with is a little tube of water that has, if you're sick with COVID, coronavirus RNA, coronavirus nucleic acid in there.
Yeah.
And that's a small volume of water.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to tell if the person is sick with COVID or not. And so here's where like microfluidics can step in. And actually I can talk about like, I'll just talk maybe like a 2-minute, I'll give a 2-minute explanation of my research.
Yeah, I think
It's like,
this is pretty interesting. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
awesome. This is like the thing to talk about it, like
At parties.
cocktail parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll always say this story.
Uh-huh.
And people tell me like, Diego, who invited you? Like, how did you get it?
It's okay. I invited you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So you have this little pool of water. It's got the coronavirus RNA, right? And we have methods to detect that nucleic acid that are not microfluidic in nature. So I'll say this: like microfluidics is like you're handling very small amounts of liquid. We don't say that anything that involves handling small amounts of liquid is microfluidics. It's typically like more complicated handling. So like, for example, I don't know if have you ever heard this word pipette?
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
I just
so
know,
pipette,
like, I
you
know about it as the device you use in like a chemistry lab, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
And
yeah.
for people that don't know, basically think about it as like a very sophisticated straw that you can put into solutions and withdraw like known amounts of liquid. So we don't call pipetting microfluidics, but we call, for example, microscopic scale pipes, we call that microfluidics. So anyways, whatever, stepping back, I'll tell you that what we do in my lab and we can explain why we do this later, whatever. We take the small amount of water, right? It's got the coronavirus RNA, and we put it inside this thing that we call a microfluidic chip. And in our case, the microfluidic chip, think about it as a block of glass, just a block of glass, like a microscope slide. That's a block of glass, right?
Yeah.
A microscope slide with a really tiny pipe inside. So it's just like the pipe in your house, right? It's just like a hole, a cylindrical hole. That's all it is. It's a pipe. It just happens to be on the size, about the size. It's a microscopic scale.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pipe about the diameter of a hair, right?
Okay.
So we have a piece of glass with a hole in there, about the size of a human hair, and we have this volume of liquid, and we do this technique where we take the nasopharyngeal swab, and we put it at the entrance of the pipe.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And now the pipe is flooded with water, right? And this is gonna get a little bit hairy, like the description,
Uh-huh.
but the people at home, they can just maybe like skip ahead if they don't want to hear this.
Uh-huh.
Okay, it's not true that it's just the RNA that's floating around in the water.
Yeah.
There's actually other things. There's like mucus,
Yeah.
right, from your nose. There's proteins, just like proteins are these molecules inside of your body that your body produces them. Other organisms also produce them, and they're also floating around next to the nucleic acid. And it turns out that the detection of the nucleic acid, of the RNA, is very difficult if you have all of these other molecules. So what we do is we have this pool of water. We apply an electric field, which is basically like taking both ends of a battery, connecting them to the water. And we actually induce a current. But, most people, when they think about currents, it's like electronic currents. It's transfer of electrons.
Yeah.
But in this case, we're talking about an ionic current.
Okay.
It's a current of ions.
Okay.
So these are charged molecules.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the nucleic acid has a negative charge.
Okay.
And under that electric field, it actually starts moving. It's pretty cool.
Okay. So this is like electrolysis. Like when you learn how to like copper plate something, you're talking about like, is it like that?
Electrolysis actually is a side effect of what we do, but it's not what we're trying to do.
Okay.
I think if you've ever heard the term capillary electrophoresis,
no.
It's very similar to what we're doing.
Okay.
We do this thing called isotachophoresis.
Okay.
But, really just this is the most important takeaway.
Yeah. The ions, they behave as ions, and then they move in the electric field. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or even simpler than that. It's just like pool of water, electric field, and the DNA actually, or the RNA, actually moves under the electric field. It's pretty cool. And that's an example of a microfluidic assay. So compartmentalizing all of that and pushing it aside, microfluidics, a lot of it is like biological applications. It's a lot of like what people call assay design. So the most sold microfluidic device in the world are pregnancy test kits.
Oh, interesting.
That's like what people commonly say. Because if you think about it, it's only using a little bit of urine, and it's screening for the presence of certain proteins in the urine. And the performance of that device is driven by what you were talking about, capillary action, right? Because it's like paper that's getting wet.
Okay.
The other famous microfluidic device is printers, inkjet printers. Because if you think about it, you're dispensing microliter volumes of really small volumes of liquid ink onto paper.
Yeah.
And that's also a microfluidic problem.
I see. Interesting. Yeah. So, I guess this makes me wonder what made you decide to go into microfluidics for your PhD?
Yeah.
Did you know that going from MIT to Stanford that you wanted to do microfluidics?
Absolutely not.
What did you want to do then?
Oh, I wanted to do robotics, actually.
Wow, that's a huge change.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's a huge change. I mean,
how did that happen?
I changed.
How did that happen?
Okay, so I think the first thing I learned, in my last year of undergrad at MIT, I was doing the robotics research. And I also did this 1 month long research project where we developing a hydrogen-based engine, a hydrogen-based internal combustion engine. The point is, the hydrogen-based internal combustion engine, it sounds very complicated and very different from robotics. But, doing research is typically, it's harder and it's easier than you think. And what I mean by that is like, especially at places like MIT, Stanford, and a lot of other universities, professors, they're really smart people and they really know how to break down the problem. And what I'm trying to say is that I learned that last year of MIT that you should never be intimidated by research projects, by the name of the research project, what skills it involves, because most of the time you can learn those skills on the job.
Yeah.
And the other thing I learned is that not everything you do has to define you, right? So like, if you do a robotics research, that's not who you are.
Yeah.
You're not a robotics researcher. If you do microfluidics research, you're not a microfluidics researcher if you don't want to be. That could be just something that you are doing in that moment, right?
Yeah.
And I think that being an engineer is being an engineer. You should be able to work on different projects. So what I mean to say with all of that is I left MIT. I thought I was really into robotics. I learned that I could take up other projects, and I learned that I could just try something new. And that's when I first came into Stanford. I think I dropped the robotics thing pretty quickly, And very quickly, my goal was, I don't know what I want to do, but I want to do something different. That's what I want to do. Um,
Was there like
and I,
some
I don't know if you
experience
had
that
a
you had that pushed you away from robotics?
Not really. I don't. In fact, I wouldn't even say I got pushed away from robotics. I
Yeah.
think I was just more pushed into other things.
Okay.
I was like, robotics is cool. I have nothing against it.
Yeah.
Maybe I go back again, right, and do it.
Yeah.
But I just want to do something different right now.
Yeah.
And so I started looking at other things. I started like thinking on a more fundamental level about the kind of research I wanted to do.
Okay.
Like, I want to do energy generation, or I want to solve the water crisis, or I want to study global warming. Just like
Yeah.
really broad strokes topic. And like just pick anything that sounds interesting to you. That's the way I was thinking about it, right?
Okay.
And this is actually something we can talk about. Is like, I think mechanical engineering versus electrical engineering versus aeroastro engineering versus bioengineering.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is like dissolving.
You mean the boundaries
The
between
boundaries
them?
are dissolving. Yeah, research is more
It's very
interdisciplinary every
multidisciplinary.
day.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah. So my goal was to just do something new. That's all I cared about, and I just happened to end up in this microfluidics lab because I wanted to work on water desalination, and this professor was investigating water desalination, and um, and I was only going to do it for a quarter, which is like a half a semester. I was only going to do it for that long, but I actually liked the lab environment so much that I decided to stay for my PhD, and that's how I ended up in microfluidics for these 5 years.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, my my thing is like that I really try to emphasize is it's not a definition of who you are. You can do a PhD in microfluidics and then go and do something else,
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Before we leave microfluidics, I'm curious. Like,
Mm-hmm.
can you tell us a bit where the field is going? Like, because you talked about the difference within, well, at least in academia. So
Mm-hmm.
you said industry sort of thinks on smaller timescales, trying to solve smaller
Yeah.
timescale problems. Like, what are the
Mm-hmm.
problems that academia microfluidics are trying to solve right now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have thoughts about this. Okay, so like microfluidics. So even the word fluidics, um, it's like, have you ever even heard that word before, fluidics?
No.
Because people talk about fluid dynamics and
Yeah.
fluid mechanics,
Yeah.
but they don't talk about fluidics.
Yeah.
And I think the origin of this term is like, the analogy is electronics. So electronics is based on like movements of electrons, right?
Yeah.
But fluidics is based on movement of fluids, and fluidics really got started, as far as I know, like around the time of the World War II. So what happened was electromagnetic pulses were being like developed, and so this is like it's like a bomb that you can use to disable electronic communications. But what you cannot disable with an electromagnetic pulse are fluidic communications.
What are
So if you can
fluidic
believe this,
communications?
it's developing computers that run on water movement.
Wow. Okay.
So think about that. Like,
Yeah.
like
Like, what's the
currents is
transistor fluids? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So and you can develop those actually. People
Okay.
develop pumps, like one-way valves, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You can develop, like people have built calculators with fluids moving around in pipes.
Wow. Okay.
It's like hugely impractical, right?
Yeah.
Because then you have to be handling, you can't shrink it,
Yeah.
right? So like
I'm not gonna have a
that's where
smartphone
microfluidics
that
comes
runs
in.
on on fluids anytime soon.
Exactly. So microfluidics was like try to resolve that by having smaller scale, right, pipes, right?
Yeah.
That's how the kind of like the field got started, but
Okay.
it pretty quickly changed into more of these like biological problems. A lot of microfluidics lately has turned into what's called point of care diagnostics, which is basically like, I have a box that you can put a little bit of liquid inside of it, and I'm going to tell you in 5 minutes whether you have this disease, whether you're pregnant, versus whether you're whatever. Uh, that's a big part of microfluidics right now. And another big part is like these things people call organ on a chip.
Haven't heard of this.
So yeah, so I'll give you an example. People can build like tiny microfluidic channels where they can line one side of the channel with um, uh, cells, and they can with some type of cell,
Yeah.
and they can line another part of the channel with another type of cell. And people have done this, like for example, to study like exchanges of molecules between a mother and her baby. So they'll put like
Oh,
placental
yeah.
lining cells,
Yeah.
and they can say like, oh, if I flow caffeine through the mother channel, I picked up a little bit of caffeine inside of the placental channel, which means that when a mom drinks, I mean, it could mean that when a mom drinks caffeine, she might be giving a little bit of caffeine to the baby or something like that. And you
Yeah.
can say like, oh, so you can't do it, it's dangerous, whatever.
Right.
So that's called like organ on a chip. That's like, I think the biological applications is really what's happening with fluid mechanics. Sorry, with microfluidics right now. But there's something happening right now in microfluidics that people are saying its days as a research project are kind of coming to an end. It's kind of interesting to even. I mean, before I started in science, I thought it didn't make any sense to say like you can discover all of the problems in a field. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So people say like all of the interesting problems have been solved, right? Like
Yeah. All
I
the
think
low
that's a
hanging
crazy
fruits.
idea.
Wait, is it different from like all the low hanging fruit are picked, and like because we still can't solve Navier-Stokes, right? But
Right?
like,
Yeah. Exactly.
but I don't know how many people have just given up and moved on. So
I think it's different, but it's
yeah.
an interesting question also about the low hanging fruit. So like low hanging fruit is like problems that are really easy,
Yeah.
right? And it's like when something is new, sometimes there's a lot of easy problems that you can solve in a couple years, and you get published, and you're gonna get a lot of citations on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but I think that more like interesting problems is like more like things that people care about. You know, like
Okay.
I think you can always do research. You can always ask more questions. There's always something new to find out. But the point is like, at what point do people even care about it? You know, like one way to think about it is like, you know, let's say you're able to get a pregnancy test. You get an answer in 5 minutes, and then someone says, "Oh, I developed one that gives you an answer in 1 second," and that might be pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
But if someone then goes and says, "Hey, I can give you one," it gives you an answer in 1/10 of a second.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you really don't care,
Yeah.
right? At that point, right? It's
Yeah.
like it's not as interesting, right? So, anyways, whatever. People are saying that microfluidics is a middle-aged field in
Interesting.
terms of how many problems that are left to be solved, and they think a lot of microfluidics people think that it's going to transition from a research field into an industrial field. And
Okay.
what it means is like microfluidics is now a tool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like something that we'll use every day, especially biologists will use every day, but they're not going to be really like microfluidics researchers. It'll be more done by like companies and stuff like that.
Yeah. Can you give us an
Which is
example of the companies that will be taking this up or that are doing it already?
yeah, so right now the biggest companies that are doing microfluidics. So I'll give you the example of the inkjet printers, right?
Yeah.
The
That's like
pregnancy
HP.
tests.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. Pregnancy
Yeah.
test.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pregnancy tests, and then more increasingly now, it's like microfluidic assays that are being sold. Like so, for example, um, there's this company. It's called Illumina. Illumina makes microfluidic chips that are used for genetic sequencing.
Okay.
So the idea is like, you take a human sample, and you want to know the DNA of that human,
Like a spit
right?
sample.
Spit sample, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you want to know the DNA of that, like for example, like 23andMe,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
like you have someone's saliva, you want to find out what their genome is, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You need to process that small amount of saliva, and one way that is done is inside of a microfluidic chip. So again, it's a glass block with tiny channels inside.
Yeah.
And these channels, they have these like interesting design that lets a company like Illumina determine your genome, and using other technologies also. But that's an example of like a microfluidic device.
I see.
That's like an industry, right?
Yeah.
And then there's this other big company. It's called like Genentech. It's based in Bay Area, and so what they're doing is they're selling to researchers devices for organ on a chip. So like you can do organ on a chip because like, I mean that's a whole other thing. I mean you can have companies that sell to researchers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not just to consumers or to other companies, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's what's gonna happen in microfluidics. Like microfluidics, a lot of people have done research in it. It's gonna boil down to a couple of killer applications where microfluidics just makes a huge difference, and I think that those companies are gonna be pretty profitable. I think that's really what we're gonna see in microfluidics. And as a normal non-engineer, you're most likely going to interact with microfluidics in the biological space, even if you don't know it, right? Especially in these point of care diagnostics.
Yeah. I see. I see.
So look out for microfluidics. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Diego, I remember in undergrad, there was sort of a point when you said you wanted to become a professor. Was it that made you decide to do a PhD, or did you want to do a PhD before? And yeah, can you like tell us what made you decide to do a PhD and what exactly it means to do a PhD?
Yeah. So I'll first answer why I wanted to do a PhD. You're right. I was an undergrad. I wanted to be a professor, and if you want to be a professor, you need a PhD. And so I thought I'm gonna get the PhD and then become a professor. That's reason enough for me to pursue it.
Yeah.
Now,
Before that, what did you want to do then? Because you decided you wanted to do a PhD like in your junior year or senior year? I can't remember.
Yeah, but my junior year. Before that,
Okay.
I was just considering a job as an engineer in industry. So just like working manufacturing at Apple, maybe at like Boeing or something. You know, like a pretty standard mechanical engineer job.
Right. You were
That's
at
what
Apple one summer, right? I forgot.
I did. Yeah, I worked on manufacturing. So I worked on like. Do you have a MacBook Pro? It's like
No, but I'm thinking of getting one. Yeah.
new ones look really nice. So it's like if you have your laptop here, flip it over backwards. The plate of aluminum that's keeping the battery inside. That's what I was working on. That was my baby.
Okay, so when it's overheating and on my lap, I can blame you.
Absolutely not. That was not on the design.
Okay.
But yeah, that's like in undergrad. I started thinking I want to be a professor. I'm gonna finish undergrad. I'm gonna get a PhD, and then I'm gonna become a professor. And then I strayed away from that, and I said, I'm just gonna be an engineer at Apple, or something similar along those lines. But then I circled back, and I said, you know what? I want to be a professor, and I wanted to be a professor because I was really motivated. I thought research sounded very attractive to me.
Yeah.
So that's why I started the PhD. Now,
What is a PhD?
what is a PhD? So that's a good question, and I think you don't know what it is until you're a couple of years in. I would summarize it like this: you have to do research. It's like getting a job, and your job is to do research, which is what we talked about, which is just doing something that no one else has done before, or learning something that no one else has ever learned before,
Yeah.
and publishing it. So that's the PhD. You get a job. You're doing research, doing things no one has ever done before, and you do it for about 5 years, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less. And hopefully after these 5-6 years, you write 1 to 3 papers, you publish those papers, and then you give a presentation about them, and then you get a diploma that says you have a PhD.
Yeah.
I think that's the simplest way to think about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you take classes, sometimes you don't take classes, but I think all of those are minor things.
Yeah. I think
Is that a fair assessment, you think?
Yeah, I think to add to that, it's sort of convincing, like the university who awards you the PhD is that you're like the world's expert in this thing because you did something new that no one did before. So like by definition, you're the expert, but that you're like a good expert, So
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to publish good research, right? And it has to stand up like to scrutiny.
Yeah.
When you give this defense, it's like or this presentation. Actually, people call it a defense,
Right?
Because you're defending the work that you've done, right? I think that's the simplest way to think about it. And then from a practical perspective, like what does it feel like? I would say it feels like being a college student, it feels like a hybrid between being a college student and between having a job. I think, I don't know if you also agree with that, because you get like the parts about like being a college student is like being in the university, being surrounded with people your age, young people,
Yeah.
uh, working at this university, like all these parts about like student culture and student life that's still present,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In some ways, even more so. But then it's also kind of like a job because you're actually getting paid. At Stanford, for example, you can't pay your way to a PhD. Like some people pay for undergraduate degree, right? You
Yeah.
don't pay for a PhD. In fact, you have to get paid to finish a PhD at Stanford.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's like an interesting job also because it's a lot. I think it's weird. Sometimes it feels like less pressure than a real job, in the sense like you don't need to actually build anything that makes any money, right?
Yeah.
But you do have to publish, and that's pretty hard. I mean,
Yeah. They
think
publish or
about that like
perish.
yeah,
Yeah.
and from just like a conceptual level, like doing something that no one else has ever done before.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard enough to understand what has been done, right?
Yeah.
Like to be actually up to date on what people have done in your field is a lot harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah,
To,
and
to
people think.
yeah,
Hmm.
one difference with the undergrad experience for me in terms of like doing like theoretical physics is that where and I think this applies to you also, is that all the problems you do, everything you do in undergrad basically in the curriculum, they know it
Hmm.
can be solved. They're giving you problems that can be
Yeah.
solved, but in research
Hmm.
you're doing things that you don't know if it can be solved, or if you have the skills to solve them, if it's within your reach for
Yeah,
5 years, if like
for sure.
human knowledge has like the tools right now to solve the problem. So it's
Yeah,
very
no,
scary. Yeah.
you don't want to bite off more than you can chew,
Yeah.
right? Or like, no, for sure. And that's part of the reason the PhDs take so long, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you really don't know the difficulty of what you're doing. You also waste a lot of time. I've wasted a lot of time, like, sometimes doing things that it wasn't really needed to do in the big picture, right? Like maybe focus on details too much.
Yeah.
Um, but okay, so doing a PhD, you can do it because you want to be a professor, but there are other reasons to pursue a PhD that are not just that.
Yeah.
And I think like, so on the one hand, you really do improve your analytical skills, especially in STEM. I think there's no denying that. Just because when you're trying to do that, like do something that no one else has ever done before, you typically have to operate at a pretty high level technically, right? Like you need to master certain physics, or you need to master certain experimental techniques. Like you need to know a lot about them to advance the field, right?
Yeah.
So you're definitely getting stronger in that sense. And then you also learn presentation skills. And I think that you can learn presentation skills at a job also. But a PhD involves a lot of writing, actually, a lot more than people think, and a lot of preparation of figures, which, so figure is just like a cartoon, like you have cartoons in your science textbooks, right? Doing that is also a form of writing, and you have to learn how to do that,
Communication. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Otherwise, no one will
if you do it,
understand what you do, and then you wouldn't get
absolutely,
recognized for it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes back actually to what we were talking about at the start about like content versus presentation, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so if you do a PhD, I think you will improve both of those skills. And even though I'm not pursuing the professor job, I don't regret at all pursuing the PhD. I have no regrets really about that.
Yeah.
I'm very happy with where I am today. I like who I have become after the PhD as well. I think I've changed for the better.
Yeah, I guess I was gonna ask that question, but since you already answered, you don't regret it. Let's talk about. At one point, did you decide you didn't want to be a professor anymore, or like so that's like not staying in academia, and then you are now going to Bain and Company to become a consultant. So, what made you decide to become a consultant? How did you leverage your skills from a PhD in mechanical engineering to a consulting company?
Yeah, so I would say I still want to be a professor actually.
Oh, okay.
But I
Okay.
want to do other things also.
Okay.
I want to do. That's how I think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very likely I'll never be a professor in my life.
Okay.
Just because there are other things I want to do. I
Yeah.
mean, or part of the reason is there are other things I want to do, and maybe things I want to do more urgently.
Yeah.
Uh,
Is it easy to
there's a variety.
go from consulting back into professor?
I think it's possible. I
Okay.
think I'll talk about consulting in a little bit.
Yeah.
Basically, what has happened in my life is like the past 2 years. I think I've kind of like refocused my energies towards building a life and not just a career.
Yeah.
And about being happy and whatever. It's just a very complicated process.
Yeah.
I decided I think I would be happiest working in a company and doing research within a company, and for a variety of reasons. And if I want to do that, if I want to do research at a company, I would also like to be able to direct research. I would like to be able to choose the topics that we research at a company, or to have people that I can advise in certain research projects. And I thought I can either do that by getting a job at a company in a research position at that company,
Yeah.
and working my way up until I'm a manager at one of these companies. Or the other way I could have done it is take a job in consulting, and for those that don't know what consulting is, we can talk about it afterwards. But when you work as a consultant, as a management consultant, what happens is in about 2 or 3 years, you learn a lot about management techniques and about business and about communication skills. And after those 2 or 3 years, you actually are very likely to, you can do a lot of things, and you're actually very likely to be able to then get that management job in a research division of a company. Does that make sense? I think of it kind of as a shortcut to my goals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's basically it. Yeah.
I thought about that, but so maybe you can use this opportunity to fill in like what is a consultant, but also how do you manage? So you're going from something that was very technical, right, to something. So I would say maybe this is not a good term to use, but I would say going from like the hard skills to the soft skills. Is that true?
Yeah. Right.
And now you want to go into managing a team, a scientific team. Right. So are you worried that you're suddenly someone who has all these soft skills? You know, are you worried that you're managing people who has more technical skills than you, and there's a big disconnect, and they're like, what does he think he knows telling us? You know.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
no, it's a huge problem. It's definitely something to think about. I'll say this. Most of the C-level executives at most major companies, even tech companies, tech companies, engineering companies, software companies, bio companies, most of them do not have PhDs.
Yeah.
Right? Most of them got to where they are with soft skills.
Yeah.
And I just say that to kind of don't underestimate the importance of soft skills, which I think is something I've done in my life a lot. It's definitely something to think about. I mean, you cannot just have soft skills. Of course, you need the hard skills. But I think it's good to have both. And the other way I thought about consulting is the way I was thinking about, I'm not a microfluidics researcher.
Yeah.
I'm just because I'm doing it right now. I'm not a researcher just because I'm doing it right now. You know, I'm a more complex human being, and I want to do something that's not research for a little bit. You know, also to feel that. But for those who don't know what management consulting is, that's the kind of consulting that we're talking about. It's called management consulting. It's basically like a hired brain. Think of it that way. Like companies, sometimes they have problems that they just don't know how to solve. Like for example, GE, General Electric, in the 80s, 90s, they had all of these divisions. They developed aircraft engines, they developed washing machines, refrigerators, all of these other things. And they saw that some of their sectors of business were making a lot of money and some were losing a lot of money. And just because of the nature of their job, they weren't sure what to do. Like, should I cut these parts of the company that are not making money? Should I invest more in those parts of the company? And sometimes you just want to hire someone from outside to look at your company for about 3 months and make you a recommendation. And that's what a consultant does, and they do this with many different companies. So you get to see a lot of different things. That's how I thought about it. That was a really big motivator for me.
I see. And how did you
Mhm.
use your skills as a mechanical engineer how did you leverage those skills? Or like, what were the transferable
You
skills for a consulting company to
very
hire you?
Mostly the communication skills. I think that's like the most direct skill.
Yeah.
You need analytical skills. You need to be quick on your feet. So like one thing that they talk about in the interviews, they ask you to think mathematically. Like, so for example, if someone says something like, oh, like 5 out of 20 of our, or uh, let's say 6 out of 20 of our products are selling really well, you need to be able to think like, oh, so about 25% of our things are selling well. I mean, that's a very dumb
Yeah.
example, I think, but the point is like to spot trends, be
Yeah.
able to do quick calculations really fast.
Okay.
That's very
So
valuable.
so the idea is like is this skill set sort of like seeing some problem, transferring it into math, or then
Yeah,
vice
exactly.
versa, transferring some math and like communicating it well back.
Yeah.
Is that
And
it?
yeah, and
Okay.
actually, I think one of the most important skills of any researcher in any field
Yeah.
is the ability to dumb problems down, because things are just so complex. You would never be able to model, right, the entire interaction of a protein binding to another protein, right? But if you have a very simple model that describes it well, that's very valuable,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Okay, so let's wrap it up with the last two things. Can you tell us what are some like interesting books recently that you would recommend and why?
Yeah. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Have you heard of this book?
No, I haven't.
Oh yeah, it's a pretty old book. I think it's actually like 80 years old or something. It's written by a guy named Dale Carnegie.
Okay.
It's a very interesting look at like engineering, social interactions. I highly recommend it.
Okay.
Another book I recommend is called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. It's about the current state of the internet and how much information is being gathered around us. It's very interesting,
Yeah.
the world that we live in, and uh, those two, I think those two were fun read. I read this other one. It was like it was just pretty fun book. It was called Salt, Sugar, Fat.
Yeah, I've heard of
By
this one. But I
Yeah,
haven't.
what's the guy's name? Is Michael Moss, I think, is the author.
Okay.
It's a really fun story. I mean, it's about like the processed food industry, like
Okay.
like cereal and candy bars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was pretty fun read.
Okay. Nice. That surveillance one sounds interesting. Like,
Hmm.
what was the key? What did you change? How did you change any of your actions based on reading it?
I am now very averse to creating online accounts. Like 5 years ago, like if I have to download a document
Yeah.
and it asks me to create an account,
Yeah.
I would have just created the account, given my email, given my phone number, my name, whatever.
Yeah.
I really try to avoid it now. Like, for example, you sent me that Dropbox link. I
Yeah.
had to create an account.
Oh,
I
okay.
had a Dropbox account, and I
Yeah.
actually deleted. I try to delete as much of my online presence as possible. I have no social media. Um, just like, yeah, it's just like it's pretty crazy. I think what was most eye opening is crazy how profitable our information is actually.
Interesting.
I think that's going to be a big thing, like privacy rights, and like I think eventually people will think of Facebook as like cigarette companies back in the 90s or something like that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to be regulated.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely
Hmm.
want to check that out. Okay, so last and like final question. What advice would
Yeah.
you give Diego 10 years ago?
Uh, Take all of your money and put it in Bitcoin.
Okay.
Absolutely. And then number two, take it out in January of 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not gonna
No.
hold on for dear life. Is that it?
Yeah, no, maybe. No, uh, Advice. Okay, so the number one is to take more like one-off classes, like I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
Like while I was at MIT, I should have taken like one class in bioengineering, another class in computer science. I mean, these are just topics that are interesting to me, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and just other topics instead of taking so many classes in design. Um, and then also, I wish I would have done more research as an undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I would have taken it more seriously, uh, because I was not able to learn really what it meant to do research until I was like at Stanford, like 2 years, 3 years, even.
Yeah.
Um, so both of those things. I think also the other thing I regret about Boston and my time here at Stanford, about MIT and my time here at Stanford, is I wish I would have seen more things. Like leave Boston more often,
Yeah.
and see other parts of Massachusetts, like the natural parks near there.
Yeah.
Go to different towns, like
Yeah.
like I only ever went to Rhode Island like once or something like that. Just like these places I haven't been, now I'm in California, and the national parks out here is incredible. And I've definitely gone to some, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But I wish I would have done more,
Yeah, same. Okay, so yeah, I think that's it, right?
Yeah. I
um
hope you got enough material, dude. I hope it wasn't too bad.
no. Yeah, thanks for agreeing to be on this podcast. I think it's
Yeah,
super
of course, man.
valuable. I think a lot of people are gonna be excited to hear what you had to say. Yeah.